Well, where your boy fucked up. So this would be my weekly series or weekly video, I think, in terms of reviewing the last week how I did, because the whole point of this channel and why I'm doing this is not just to like throw out picks and run. It's really to get more and more accurate until now. I'm gonna hold off on saying we can be perfect because yeah, maybe a little bit too crazy, but I think that the current levels are of kind of generally accepted good prediction is I feel like it can be better. I'll do a whole video in the future, kind of explaining why I think that and everything. But basically, the point of this video is to look at all the games, see where I was right, where I was wrong, and what can be learned from those games. Um, so the first game I'm going to start with is the Titans at Colts. I had both teams with points ranges of 24 to 32. I felt very strongly about the over 51 and a half. Pretty good about the Titans plus three, as well as the Titans money line. I didn't discuss that in the video, so in this specific this week, I'm not going to be talking about like money lines and stuff. Going forward, I will be because I'm going to include those in the individual games. But for this, not going to like count that as a victory because I don't have the video evidence of it. Though I did. I mean, obviously given Titans plus three. But anyway, so with the game, final score Titans 45 and Colts 26. Now Colts right in the range that I predicted. Titans a little bit higher, but that was boosted by a fourth quarter the AJ Brown returning a onside kick for a touchdown, which if you wanna call that super wrong, you can. I'm not going to. I don't think there's much to be learned about something like that. But yeah, for the meaningful things. As far as the Titans offense goes, I actually underrated. So I talked how they're going to be able to run the ball in that video, but I actually underrated how well it went. I mean, it was like 167 yards, something like that from Derrick Henry. 178. Now that was over 27 attempts, so it wasn't. I mean, that's a lot of attempts. It is a lot of yards still, but yeah, I talked about how good they're gonna be able to run the ball, and what I think I underestimated, or what I overestimated, was the ability of the Colts backups that came in for DeForest Buckner and Denico Autry. Um, yeah, it just they were just not as stout as I expected, which I mean makes sense retroactively, of course. And I would actually say that they weren't, yeah, so ungodly awful, and then other games are going to be better. Just in this one, in the unique circumstance of not affecting Derrick Henry before he gets going, this is what you end up with. Um, and yeah, as far as the rest of the Titans offense goes, yeah, when Ryan Tannehill is not bothered, he's fine, and that's what happened in this game, right? And I will say for sure too, I did underestimate AJ Brown. Because what I was thinking was that Xavier Rhodes, for all of his problems, is actually pretty legitimately good at limiting bigger bodied receivers, like Allen Robinson, example of that. But AJ Brown is just a different type of receiver. Not just because he's better necessarily, he's just different. He doesn't rely on the same type of physicality and little route running techniques that those guys do. He's quicker actually. Is an interesting dynamic with him than a lot of those guys. I'm not sure what his combine said about that, but he just clearly is on film. And his strength is just on a whole different level too. Um, I did mention Johnny Smith and Anthony Firkser's being okay, but the Titans they actually did something interesting, and so they went with Jeff Swaim as their kind of first string tight end in that game. But I can see why. I mean, I can see why that kind of sounds ridiculous. But Johnny Smith is just, I mean, it makes sense, right? He's not a zone being tight end. He's not a skilled route runner. And I can see why in this game they would have felt that they thought they were going to be able to run the ball too. And Jeff Swaim is certainly better at run blocking at this point. Um, so that's just an interesting fact. I don't think that really means anything going forward. It's just kind of interesting. Yeah, I talked about how even in the last game the Titans were better than the Colts, not by this much. I think this is swinging too much to the other end. But even in the last game where they lost, they were better, and you saw that this because that last game was affected by two crazy punt returns. This one not as affected by ridiculous stuff, and this is what you got. Again, I think this is on the extreme end of the difference between these two teams, but this, I mean, I don't think it's crazy by any means. And then from the Colts side, yeah, I mean, once they got down, like I said, they weren't able to run. I mean, they just I tell you, they're just not as crazy of a run blocking offensive line as people talk about. They were talk about them being. And in the first half, when the game was close, you saw that. And of course, when you got to the second half, they weren't run blocking really anymore. Um, and I did talk about the Colts tight ends as being effective in this game, which they were. Trey Burton caught a touchdown. Mohali Coxon was, I mean, maybe effectiveness a little bit strong. I maybe did expect a little too much out of them, but I think they were. I mean, they were more useful than the receivers were. And I did specifically talk about Nyheim Hines too. I mean, he had I think 8 receptions or something for 80 yards, something like that in this game. Let me check that real quick. Yeah, 8 receptions for 66 yards, and yeah, I talked about how he was going to be useful in this game for sure. So I feel good about that. So yeah, I mean, with this spread, like I said, the over, that's exactly what I was talking about with the two teams being able to score, and the defense is not, especially the Colts, not what people think it is, and Titans plus 3 was all good too. So I don't know that there's a whole lot to really take note of going forward from this game, outside of the Colts, yeah, backups not being quite as good as I thought. But in other games, I actually think they might be a little bit better than this. So moving to the next game, we'll go to the Giants at Bengals. So I had a point spread of points range for the Giants 17-24, and for the Bengals 10-17. The final score was Giants 19 and Bengals 17, so right on both of those. Um, and yeah, and I said so. This game I just didn't want to touch. And I kind of went over why in that video. Basically, it just had to do with the new quarterback we don't know enough about. Although I did have definitely hunches about how good or bad he would be and was. So I kind of went with effectively nothing bets, but I did lean to slightly the Giants -6 and then the under 44.5. The under 44 was all good, and given what we know now, I for sure would have gone with that, but I still think it was not necessarily worth playing. And as far as the Giants -6 goes, I mean they were that still sounds about right. I mean the Bengals in this game scored a last second long touchdown aided by two pretty bad penalties. Um, so yeah, I think what to learn from this game. So on the Giants side, Daniel Jones got hurt in this game, which is going to be an issue. We saw Colt McCoy. He actually, I think, in ideal circumstances, if he plays a bad defense, I don't think he's going to look all that bad. Um, but yeah, I talked about specifically in my video on that game about Sterling Shepard versus LaShawn Sims, and I thought that was an advantage. And actually, I would argue, although the stats maybe don't show it as much, um, that it was. I think what to learn there is that even if the matchup sounds like a real mismatch, the player's skill has to be enough to exercise that difference. And Sterling Shepard's just not all that good of a receiver. He is good, but he's not like crazy. And LaShawn Sims, I actually, like I said, I think he's actually a reasonable corner, and so the difference just doesn't become as large in a scenario like that. Um, yeah. So notes on the Giants offense too. Shane Lemieux still started at guard, which is good. He's been probably better their best guard maybe this year so far. Although Will Hernandez just coming back from energy rotating, maybe he'll start going forward. Um, and I talked about Darius Slayton winning deep, which he did. I mean, he had a narrow miss, long touchdown at the beginning of the game, and he clearly was open. It's just once you get Colt McCoy in there, uh, the receivers getting open isn't, again, it just doesn't show up on the box score so much at that point, especially them being ahead. They were trying to run the ball. I talked about them not being able to run the ball. They couldn't well. I mean, they had some flashes, which again was because of the Giants. Sorry, the Bengals' worst linebackers like Logan Wilson, pretty specifically, which is what happened in that game. Their big plays were like on draws a couple times, or more misdirection plays than they got him. Um, yeah, I mean, and also with them, I talked about how Deion Jones just not a killer versus bad, or sorry, versus good secondaries, and that's exactly what happened. He is really predictable in terms of when he goes off. Actually, it's just the worst defense, and there are other quarterbacks where that's not the case, for kind of unique reasons. But that's what happened here, and of course he got hurt earlier, and I think that's what kept this game closer. Um, Given the final score, I think they might have scored a few more points, although they weren't looking at anything special. So on the Bengals side, quick analysis: Brandon Allen, he was just like the most stereotypical like younger backup type quarterback. I think I've seen, because you have the older guy like a Matt Schaub at this point or whatever, who's just like all about taking checkdowns all the time. Whereas there's these guys who don't understand what's happening, and so they default to moving around, running around, or just staring at their first read. And he is all of that. Pretty much, if that's he's everything you would think of when you think of like a young backup quarterback who's coming into an NFL game for the first time. Now it's not his first NFL game, so that's not a good sign. But that's really what he is. I talked about how Jonah Williams is bad in that video, and he was bad this game. His draft pedigree and the Alabama thing, and I think people, because he missed that whole first year, talked him up so much. He's just, I mean, he's bad. He gave up plays to players who have not showed anything previous this year. I mean, Carter Coughlin kind of wrecked him on the inside one play, and Carter Coughlin's been bad whenever he's played going up to this point. Giants rookie, like very late round pick, or maybe undrafted. I think he was a seventh rounder, um, outside linebacker, as well as Nico Lalo. So I actually want to talk about real quick on the Giants defense, like very quick. A couple plays that were not nothing. I'm not going to write him off as being nothing. He was just, I'm not going to write him off as being something either. Just an interesting note that he was the one who was taking advantage of it, and he actually looked like reasonable. Um, yeah, I talked about the Bengals not being able to run the ball. They couldn't at all. Makes a lot of sense. They did go with Quinton Spain and Bobby Hart and Alex Redmond. So they had three spots in question that I talked about in my video, um, outside of Jonah Williams and Trey Hopkins at center, and that was what they went with. Um, I applaud them for benching Michael Jordan, just like North Carolina. Um, but they also put back in Bobby Hart, which he, because I do think, yeah, their best guard. I think they found their best guards, and I just hope that they realize that Bobby Hart can't play. Although he wasn't actually a disaster in this game, and try Hakeem and Digi more. Not that that's super important. Um, yeah, so I think going forward, even 17 points, they were lucky to get to that. They had a kick return touchdown, and and their other two scores actually were off of getting the ball at like the 50-yard line, uh, or very or turnover, things like that. Or sorry, there, and then there was the last second score given a really a goofy pass interference call and a goofy roughing the passer call. So I think going forward they're actually going to be even worse offensively, like notably worse. So that's what I would learn from that game. Nothing too much about the spreads. Like I said, I don't know enough, but I do think I know enough going forward to really, really say that the Bengals are going to be terrible, like terrible, terrible offensively, which maybe you think is a given, but I was curious, and I think that definitely proved to be the case. So jumping to the next game, the Cardinals at Patriots. So I had given the Cardinals a point spread of 18-26, and the Patriots 14-21, and the final score was Cardinals 17, Patriots 20. That, of course, though, was a last second or last minute missed field goal by the Cardinals that was immediately taken down the field and kicked and made it the other way for the Patriots to win the game in the final seconds. So I felt very strongly about the under 49, and I also felt decent, but and maybe that's too strong. I felt about the Cardinals minus 2.5, and yeah, I mean the under hit by a lot. Pretty much all the reasons, effectively exactly what I said in the video, just being both these offenses shoot themselves in the foot all the time. Um, and the Cardinals minus 2.5 again. That was, so it ended up being wrong, but that's one of those ones where I think the lesson isn't necessarily that like that was the wrong side of it. It was just that that game wasn't worth betting on in terms of the spread. because both the teams just do too much stupid stuff all the time. So yeah, I mean, in terms of specifics, I talked exactly about DeAndre Hopkins not beat. He just doesn't beat Stephon Gilmore type corners very well. He was okay, I think 6 for 55 or something, which is again exactly what I said. He's just not a killer against those type of players. Um, yeah, their run game was it was okay, but nothing great. I actually expected there to be a little bit more of like chunk plays from that, but looking at what happened in the game, the I think it was really the Patriots front seven was just more disciplined than I gave them credit for. And when they've been run over, it was by like the 49ers earlier, and their combined scheme, like a better scheme with better personnel in terms of running the ball. And that's what kind of caused their issues. Whereas in this game, the Cardinals, it's just a kind of a mockery of that scheme, and their offensive line does not have nearly the same ability as run blockers. And also, I got memed by Bill Belichick. With all the questionable stuff, I didn't think Juwan Bentley was going to play, who was a useful run defending linebacker, and I didn't think that Kyle Duggar was going to play necessarily either. And he wasn't like great in this game, but he's useful for this type of thing. Um, yeah, I mean, I talked about Mir Bird and Jacoby Myers being okay in this game, which they were. But this is what you get when they're the main drivers of your offense. It's bad. I mean, 20 points was, again, that was even high because they benefited from the Cardinals having, I think, 2 tipped interceptions in their own half. Um, so even this score was a little higher than it probably should have been in the end. So yeah, that's just what you get. I talked specifically about the Patriots tackles being okay run blockers, which actually they were not quite that. So I'm going to keep that in mind going forward. That especially Jermaine Illuminor, who did start over Justin Herron on the other tackle spot away from Michael Onwenu. He's not quite the killer that I thought maybe he was in the run game, which I can understand why that is. But also Marcus Golden played a good game as the one-sided run defender. Um, yeah, the pass rush, exactly what I said. Not good. Kyler Murray sacked himself once or twice, but that was pretty much it. Um, yeah, I think I feel really good about what I talked about in this game. I mean, of course, it did go under by a lot, and yeah, well, while the Arizona part of it was wrong, I don't. I mean, there's not only so much you can do. And I think the lesson there is more that this specific game was not worth betting on, rather than that was the wrong side of it. Um, so then moving on to the Panthers and Vikings. So I had the Panthers at a point spread of 16-24 and Vikings 21-28. The final score was Panthers 27 and Vikings 28. Um, but oh yeah, and then I had felt very strongly about the Vikings -3. And then I said it was effectively unbettable in terms of the over under. I ended up choosing the over 50, and that's what happened. But I mean, that's not something I feel correct about really, because that just wasn't something I felt worth betting. And really, I think you saw in this game why. The final score was 1 point, but the Vikings were very clearly better. I mean, anytime right a team, and this is what happened with the Panthers, gets 2 consecutive forced fumbles returned for touchdowns, that's going to skew everything. And yeah, right at the beginning of the second half, that's what happened in this game. And I mean, going in the first half, it was everything was exactly as I said, pretty much. Outside of I will admit that the Vikings run game was not quite as good as I expected it to be. The reason for that, I think, is that I underrated Jeremy Chin. Now, Jeremy Chin scored both those touchdowns. I don't really care about that. He happened to be the one who picked it up and scored, which is cool. It's good for him, but that's not something I really care about going forward. What I do care about is that he is better against sideline to sideline run schemes that I had given him credit for up to this point, which yeah, that's on me for sure. And that's what kind of helped limit them in the first half. But yeah, I mean, I talked about how on the Vikings offense, Justin Jefferson was unguardable in this game, which he was. He was 7 for 70 or 77 or something with 2 touchdowns, and he dropped another touchdown that he was open for. And I talked specifically about Olabisi Johnson, who also had 7 for about 70 as well, because the Panthers corners secondary is just god awful, really really bad. Um, and that's why. So and then in that game though, I did talk about how if the Panthers got up by a lot, um, then the Vikings were looking bad. But some things about that one, I don't know if you want to call what was it at that point? It was 14 at the beginning of the second half. A lot you can, and I don't, and I get that for sure. But given the circumstances of how that happened, I don't necessarily think that that's a big deal. Um, given a whole half to only come back, especially the way the defense was playing. Um, for the Panthers offensive side of it, and here's another. This is something I was wrong about for sure, because I talked about in my video how I thought Teddy Bridgewater was going to throw for tons and tons of yards in this game, which he didn't. I think he was at 267 or something like that. And the reason for it is, far as I could tell, was and I did talk about how in the video that the Panthers' options were limited, given that their receivers are overrated and the Vikings corners are actually good. But what I didn't take into account was actually, and this is something that's hard to take into account, I think in general, but something I got to get better at is the coaching side of it. Because I think you saw in this game that Mike Zimmer realized that his corners were good enough to match up with the receivers. And so he made an effort to take away the shorter Teddy Bridgewater stuff. And that's not something that every defensive coordinator really like tangibly changes in their game plan week to week. They say they do, but they really just kind of play their own rules anyway in coverage a lot of times. And yeah, and looking back at it too, I think Eric Kendricks is literally the perfect outside of Bobby Wagner linebacker to play against that type of scheme, which I just didn't necessarily take into account the way I should have. So I can see why looking at it now, I can see why he didn't throw for the yards that I thought he was. Now he was still okay again too. 67 is not terrible. And I did talk about Robbie Anderson being the best receiver, which he was, although his stat line benefited from a blown coverage long touchdown, which you can take one way or the other if you want to say that that's him being good. It's definitely him being fast, but I don't know that that's the spirit of what I talked about with him. So yeah, I think the lesson from this game though is that really this is just this and the next game are both just like dumb shit happens sometimes, really, which obviously is obvious with the betting. But I mean, the Vikings were a significantly better team, and I think if you would have seen the signs were there for this too, if the 2 fumble touchdowns don't happen in the beginning of the second half, the Vikings would have started running the ball better and better. Because again, the signs were there of Shaq Thompson getting out of position, Derek Chin not being perfect still, but it didn't happen. But that's not really the lesson I guess I take away. It's just in this game sometimes that's going to happen. It's tough because again the Vikings were way better, and they still probably would have done it, by the way, without a muffed punt at the end at the 2-minute warning, which they still came back from. So. Yeah, I feel good about how I predicted that game, despite it ending up being wrong. So then the last game that I did a video for, again, going forward, I should be able to get to all the games in a week, or at least the vast majority of them, but I'm going to keep this to just the ones I made videos for, again, for the video evidence part of it. So this is Browns and Jaguars. So I had the Browns with the point spread of 33-40, and the Jaguars at 14-21. And the final score was Cleveland 27, Browns 27, and Jaguars 25. So I was off in both directions a little bit with this, but first thing I should say, I felt very, very strongly about the over in this game, which happened by quite a bit. And I also felt very, very strongly about the Browns -7, which did not end up happening. But again, we're going to talk about that in a second. So yeah, in this game, right, the end of this game, the Browns have the ball in the Jags territory, and if they end up scoring a touchdown or kick a field goal or keep the ball, any of the above. Actually, if they keep the ball, it doesn't go over. Although that's and just like kneel it out or whatever. Too much time in the game for that to happen anyway. But yeah, I mean the Browns, or sorry, so they have the ball and they go for it on 2 4th downs that are, or sorry, two like and ones. It was like 2nd and 1, and they get the first down, but it's spotted really badly. And on the challenge, they spotted off of a replay and then measured short. It was ridiculous. The next play, they have a first down. Baker makes a bad throw to drop pass, and then the 4th down play, they again, I would argue, not clearly, but I think that was a first down certainly. Refs again measure it this much short, um, which I think is probably ridiculous. But whatever. I mean, that type of stuff happens. Um, and then the Jaguars, yeah, they get the ball back and immediately go down and score a touchdown. Benefited from uh, bad, arguably bad, roughing the passer call and a pass interference in the end zone. So, if you want to say that this game was a 2 point game, you can go ahead. But I completely disagree with you. The Browns were dominant generally in this game. There were some things again. Yeah, I talked about in the video I made on this game that Baker just has issues at times, which did show up here. But I also talked very specifically about the Browns being able to kill them rushing the ball, which I mean that was obvious going into it. I'm not necessarily going to take credit for that. But I also talked very specifically about Jarvis Landry in this game, who had, I mean, 11 for 180 yards or something. I mean, there was a reason for that I went over. Um, and on the other side of it too, I mean, yeah, like I said, I felt really strongly about the over in this game for a reason, and the Jags can move the ball just like I said, and it's because when you give this Browns defense, I mean, even with a bad quarterback, the options are still there in this game, and specifically, I talked about them being able to run the ball. James Robinson like 150 yards rushing. Again, not gonna take a ton of credit for that because the Browns have such a bad run defense. But yeah, I mean, I would argue if you watch the video, this game went exactly as I said, outside of that last minute thing with the 4th downs, which the lesson there I think is probably just that 7 points is a big spread, and the Browns aren't a great team, so you just got to be careful with that. But I don't necessarily. Again, I don't. I don't. I think you would be wrong for taking the Jag side of that, despite that ending up being what happened. Um, so yeah, that's kind of my general thoughts. I'm going to refine this video as I go forward into more concise talking points. But yeah, overall for the week in terms of the stuff that was on my videos, bets I felt very strongly about. I was 4-2, which not good enough. Hopefully we should be able to get that, especially the ones I feel very strong about, perfect going forward. But keep in mind, yeah, again, the two that I got wrong were the the Vikings -3 and the Browns -7, both of which were pretty inarguably bad beats at the very least. But that's gonna happen. Yeah, because we got Cardinals Patriots under, Titans Colts over, Titans +3, and Browns Jags over, and then the spreads on the Vikings Browns game. So yeah, and I'm gonna keep track of my record going forward. I've been doing this the whole year, just not on video. So maybe in the off season I'll kind of go over how that went. Pretty good, hence me doing the video stuff. But yeah, so on the week 4-2 with the stronger stuff, the weaker stuff about 500. But I didn't think a lot of that stuff was bettable anyway. Yeah, so if you stick around this long, thanks for watching. And like I said, I'm gonna figure out a better way to do this video going forward.